The last thing I remember before the lights went out is the sound the hull made, not the impact. I've been asked about the impact 100 times in the years since. The formal inquiry, the debrief, the quiet conversation in the corridor with Admiral Ferris, where she held a cup of tea she never drank and asked me to tell her everything. I'd never give them the impact. I wasn't conscious for it. What I still have when I close my eyes in the dark and the old memory decides to surface, is the sound the hull made in the 3 seconds before the strike. Low resonance in the frame. Not an alarm, not a klaxon. More like the ship trying to tell us something the instruments hadn't worked out yet. That sound is the dividing line. Everything before it is one life. Everything after is another. My name is Marcus Webb. I served as tactical officer aboard the Utes Voss, a Thornwall-class heavy cruiser attached to the 14th Transit Group during the final months of the border negotiation we later called the Accord. I was 31 years old when the Voss went dark in the corridor. I was 63 when she came back out. I should explain what the corridor was. You can look it up now. It's in the history files, declassified, available to any civilian with a reader and an afternoon. The dry language of a declassified file doesn't give you the feel of the thing. And the feel of the thing matters for everything I'm about to tell you. The transit corridor between human-held space and what we then called the Accord frontier was roughly 11 light minutes wide and ran along a natural gravitational trough in the sector. Before the Accord negotiations began, it was heavily trafficked: supply runs, patrol rotations, diplomatic couriers moving between our stations and the Conclave observation posts. During the negotiations, transit was restricted. Only authorized vessels. Strict registry checks at both ends. The Conclave, whose entire administrative culture was built around documentation, had insisted on it. They wanted every hull logged, time-stamped, and categorized before it moved through their adjacent space. We agreed because we needed the negotiations to succeed, and because, at the time, it seemed like a reasonable ask. The Voss was authorized. We had our registry codes, our transit clearance, our diplomatic escort designation. We were carrying 2 civilian observers from the Accord Working Group and a cargo of encrypted communications equipment for the relay station at the far end of the corridor. Standard mission. The kind of run you could do half asleep. We never made the relay station. Whatever hit us, we never fully identified. The inquiry concluded it was a drifting mass. A fragment of something large enough to do hull damage, moving along the gravitational trough in the same direction we were traveling, which is why we didn't see it on approach. The Voss's bow sensors were calibrated for objects moving toward us or crossing our vector. This thing was running parallel, slightly ahead, and when our speed matched and then exceeded it, we walked right into it. Port bow took the contact. 3 compartments, immediate pressure loss. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, which means the crew in those compartments had no warning and no time. I've done the math on that. I've stopped doing the math on that. I was on the bridge when it happened. The lights went out. Not all the lights, but the ones that mattered, the navigation array and the weapons board. And then the backup systems cycled, and I heard the hull make that sound. And then there was a period I cannot account for. I woke up in the ship's medical bay. I want to be precise about what I mean. Not I was treated and came around. I woke up the way you wake from a very deep sleep, disoriented, dry-mouthed, uncertain whether it was morning or afternoon or the following week. I was lying on a bunk with a medical monitoring cuff on my left wrist, and the overhead lights were set to their dim cycle. There was a drip line in my arm. The medical bay smelled like recycled air and something antiseptic. The ship was moving. I could tell because the Voss had a specific vibration at cruise thrust, a very low, almost subsonic pulse you felt more in your chest than heard with your ears. I'd been living aboard her for 14 months. I knew her rhythms. The pulse was there. The ship was under power. I sat up. My head moved about 3 seconds behind my body. I reached up and pulled the monitoring cuff off my wrist, which triggered a soft alert somewhere in the equipment. And then I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. The door opened and Ellie Myers came in. She was the Voss's signals officer, junior grade at the time. 27 years old, a Connecticut girl from a small town nobody had heard of. The kind of officer who carried a battered personal notebook full of handwritten frequency tables, because she didn't fully trust the ship's computational memory for the kind of calculations she needed to do fast. She had an unusual face. Not beautiful in the classical sense, but striking. The kind of face you remembered. Brown hair pulled back. Dark eyes that assessed everything very quickly. She stopped when she saw me sitting up. Expression shifted through about 4 things in rapid succession. "You're awake," she said. "How long?" I said. She looked at me for a moment, in a way that told me the answer was going to be one I didn't want. Then she said, "Back down." First, I sat back down. She pulled the stool from beneath the monitoring station and sat across from me. She laced her fingers together, the way she always did, when she was about to say something technical and unwelcome. "You've been in a medical hold for approximately 11 months, she said. "Your brain activity was suppressed. The autodoc classified it as post-trauma neural depression and initiated a sustained recovery protocol. It essentially put you under." I looked at my hands. They looked like my hands. 11 months, I said. "Closer to 12 now. The ship is functional," she said. "Reduced capacity. We lost the forward sensor array in the incident, and we've been running on secondaries. The drive is intact. Life support is intact. We have 41 crew in active status, including you now. 10 are in medical holds in varying stages of recovery. 9 did not survive the incident." I heard the number. I filed it away in the place where certain numbers go. Not dismissed, not forgotten, just set aside because processing it would take time I didn't have yet. "Where are we?" I said. "That," she said, "is the more complicated question." She stood up and crossed to the small display panel near the door. She brought up a navigational overlay. We were still in the corridor, not at the relay station, at our point of origin. Somewhere in the middle, drifting along the gravitational trough at a fraction of our authorized transit speed. "We tried to make the relay station," she said, "about 8 months ago, when the ship stabilized enough to attempt thrust. We covered about 40% of the remaining distance. Then the Conclave changed the registry codes." I looked at her. What? The Accord finalized. New registry protocols. All transit-authorized vessels were required to update their identification codes within a 30-day compliance window. She paused. "We were not in communication range during the compliance window. We did not receive the update. When we attempted to broadcast our identification to the relay station, our codes were rejected. We broadcast our original codes." "Correct. And they rejected them." "They rejected them," she said. "And then they reported to the Accord Registry Authority that a vessel was transmitting invalid identification in the corridor. And the Registry Authority looked up our original codes and found them listed as inactive. The codes of a vessel declared lost in transit and struck from the register." I sat with that for a moment. "They declared us lost," I said. "Approximately 6 months after the incident," she said, "when we didn't arrive, and when our last position was in the corridor, and when no distress signal was received." She paused. "Our distress signal transmitter was in the port bow array, in the compartments that were lost." I thought about the 3 compartments. I thought about the 9 who didn't survive. "So to the Registry Authority," I said slowly, "the Voss is a derelict, an unlicensed vessel transmitting invalid codes." "Not even that," she said. "A vessel transmitting invalid codes in the corridor is logged and flagged. A vessel whose codes match a vessel already struck from the register is categorized as a navigational anomaly. The flag goes to a different department, a department that handles salvage claims and disposal authorizations." I stared at her. "They think we're wreckage. They think," Ellie Myers said carefully, "that we are something that doesn't exist anymore. And in the Conclave's administrative framework, something that doesn't exist in the register has no legal standing, no rite of passage, and no protection under the transit accords." "Can we contact Terran Command directly?" "We can broadcast on Terran emergency frequencies," she said. "We've been broadcasting since we understood the situation. We've received no reply. Our signal strength on the emergency band is degraded. We're producing about 30% of rated power on that array. We may not be reaching anyone. We may be reaching people who are receiving our signal and referring it to the Registry Authority, who then log it as anomalous emission from a listed lost vessel." I looked at the navigational overlay. Corridors stretched out in both directions. The relay station at one end, Terran space at the other. We were roughly in the middle. "How much fuel do we have?" I said. "Enough to reach either end," she said. "Not both." "What does Ren say?" She was quiet for just a moment longer than she should have been. "Ren says we should head for the Conclave relay station," she said. "Ourselves. Declare our status, request formal processing under salvage law." "Salvage law," I said. "Yes. We're 41 people on an active warship and he wants to invoke salvage law. He says it's the only framework that gives us legal standing in the corridor. If we try to cross into Terran space without valid codes, we transit as an unauthorized vessel, and the Conclave border protocols allow them to interdict us. They can classify us as a threat. They can." She stopped. "What does he actually want?" I said. She looked at me. Something in her face went very careful. "He wants to go to the station," she said. "He wants to dock and let the registry process play out. He believes we'll be repatriated eventually. He thinks the Conclave will respect the process." "And you," I said. "I think," Ellie Myers said, "that the Conclave will receive us very cordially, classify us according to their administrative framework, and file us somewhere we will never get out of. Because we are not to them a crew. We are not a warship. We are an anomaly that has inconveniently developed biological complexity." She paused. "The Conclave doesn't harm people. They're not a violent species. But their administrative processes do not have a category for what we are. And when something doesn't have a category, their systems root it into holding. And holding lasts as long as the process takes. Their processes take a very long time." I thought about that. "How long would it take," I said, "to reach Terran space under our current thrust capacity?" 47 days, she said. "Running the drive at the level I believe it can sustain without breakdown. Possibly 50 if the tertiary coolant system gives us trouble." "And if we do it," I said, "we transit as an unauthorized vessel." "Yes. And the Conclave border protocols." "Yes. Tell me about the border protocols," I said. "Tell me what the actual threat is." I sat with that for a while. The window across the medical bay showed a strip of the corridor. Stars, the faint luminous haze of the gravitational trough's dust concentration. The dark, nothing moving. "Who's been running the ship?" I said. "Collectively," she said. "Shh. Chief Engineer Vada has been managing the drive and life support rotation. I've been handling communications and navigation alongside Ren. When Ren was engaged. Lieutenant Sato took the bridge watch schedule." "Sato's a junior weapons officer," I said. "He is," she said. "He's been doing the work of someone 3 grades senior to him since month 3. I've been meaning to put in a commendation notice for him for 8 months. But a commendation notice requires a receiving authority. And we've had a complicated relationship with receiving authorities." Something almost like a laugh. "Not quite." "Tell me about the repairs," I said. She told me. It took 20 minutes. Port bow sections were sealed permanently. There was no crew capacity to rebuild them, and the autodock's material replication systems were not intended for structural work. What the engineering team had done instead was reinforce the emergency bulkheads from the corridor side, adding secondary seals made from repurposed plating from interior non-structural partitions. It held. It would keep holding. But anyone who wanted to go forward of frame 12 in the port section could not. Ship had effectively shrunk. The secondary sensor array had taken 3 separate repair cycles to get to its current state of function. The first repair had stabilized it, but left it operating on 2 of its 5 nodes. The second had brought a 3rd node back. The 3rd repair, 6 weeks before I woke up, had recovered the 4th node. The 5th node was gone. The housing was physically damaged in a way that couldn't be fixed with what they had, and the replacement components for it were in the port bow stores that were sealed. Forward communication suite was similarly reduced. The long-range array was at about 45%, which was why the distress signal had been degraded. The short-range array was fine. Internal comms were fully functional. Support. Completely functional throughout, which was the most important thing, and which was almost entirely due to Vada and his team running daily maintenance cycles and catching 2 separate filter failures before either progressed to a critical stage. "He saved everyone's life twice," Myers said, quietly without telling anyone, because he didn't want to create panic. "Times he just fixed it and logged it. I'll want to see those logs, I said. They're thorough, she said. She pulled up another overlay. Corridor had a checkpoint about 60% of the way to the Terran border. A Conclave observation post. Unmanned but active, running automated scans. Any yacht crossing through the checkpoint without valid registry codes would trigger a flag. The flag would go to a Conclave patrol response station approximately 8 light minutes off the corridor axis. Response time, assuming immediate dispatch, was about 40 minutes. 40 minutes, I said. Approximately. And our weapons. Functional, she said. Reduced capacity on the targeting systems because of the sensor loss, but our forward rail array is intact, and our kinetic defensive systems are at roughly 80% of rated output. I looked at the overlay, checkpoint, the patrol station, the distance to Terran space beyond the checkpoint. They won't fire on us, I said. It wasn't a question exactly. No, she said. Conclave doctrine doesn't include hull destruction of a vessel with life signs aboard. What they will do is attempt to match speed, establish communication, and legally compel us to halt for registry processing. She paused, which means we would be in the same situation as the station option, but in a less comfortable location. But we'd be closer to home, I said. She said nothing. If we get close enough, I said. And our emergency signal has been degraded this whole time. But it's been transmitting, and someone at Terran Command has been tracking anomalous emissions in the corridor and doing the math on where they originate. It's possible, she said. It's possible, I agreed. I looked at the overlay for a long time. The ship hummed beneath me. 41 people living in the body of a vessel that the registry said no longer existed. Eating food from stores that had been packed for a crew of 63, for a transit that was supposed to take 8 days. Breathing recycled air in a hull that had been repaired 11 times since the incident, with whatever the engineering team could fabricate from what we carried. Where's Ren? I said. He's in his quarters, she said. He's been struggling. Has he been struggling since the incident, I said, or since he started arguing to go to the station? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was measured. He was very badly hurt in the incident, she said. His injuries were, he spent 4 months in the autodock. He came out of it, but he's not. She stopped. He's not the person he was. I want to talk to him, I said. She looked at me. I'll take you to him, she said. It took me 15 minutes to be able to walk down a corridor. My legs had been inactive for nearly a year. The ship had a physical recovery program in the autodocs protocols, and my muscles had been put through passive stimulation throughout the hold. But passive stimulation is not the same as standing up and moving under load, and the first several steps were ugly and humbling. Myers walked beside me and didn't offer to help, and I was grateful for that. Ren was in his quarters. That's what I mean when I say he was in his quarters. Not in the mess. Not on the bridge, not in engineering consulting with the teams that were keeping the ship running. In his quarters, door closed. When Myers knocked, there was a long pause before the door opened. Ren had been navigator on the Voss for 3 years before I came aboard. He was a tall, lean man with the particular bearing of someone who had been doing precise, critical work for a long time. A focused stillness to him, a habit of moving carefully. He was from somewhere in the Western Territories. He had family, a daughter, I remembered. He kept a photograph of her clipped to his workstation. The man who opened the door was recognizably Ren. Same face, same height. But something in the way he stood, the way he held himself, was different. Diminished is the wrong word. It wasn't that he was less us. It was more that he had become very remote. He looked at me the way you look at someone through glass. Marcus, he said. Up. Just came out of hold, I said. He nodded. He stepped back and let us in. Quarters were neat, but not quite right. Things were where they were supposed to be, but in a way that felt like they'd been put back rather than used. Like a room someone tidied very carefully, but didn't live in anymore. How are you feeling? He said. Like someone who's been unconscious for a year, I said. He almost smiled. That sounds about right. Mayers told me where we are, I said, and about the registry situation, and about your thinking. He sat down on the edge of his bunk. He looked at the floor. We don't exist, he said. To anyone official, we're gone. That's not a situation that changes by force of will. That's a legal and administrative reality. The Conclave has the authority in this corridor, and they have a process. And the only way we get our status resolved is by going through the process. The process that puts us in a holding category, I said. For a while, but we come out the other side. Do we? I said. He looked up at me. Yes, we do. Because we're not actually dead. We're not actually wreckage. And when the process runs its course, that becomes apparent. And they release us, and we go home. And if it takes 3 years, I said, then it takes 3 years. And the crew, I said, 41 people, in a conclave holding facility for 3 years, waiting for a process. They survive, he said. 3 years is a long time, but they survive. They go home. They see their families. Something in his voice went tight on the last word. They go home, Marcus. I looked at him. The photograph. I didn't see it anywhere in the room. I looked around carefully, and it was not there. Where's the photograph of your daughter? I said. He looked at me in a way that I didn't understand at the time. A complicated look. Tired and sad and something else. Something that was almost an apology. I don't have that anymore, he said. I stayed with him for another hour. I talked to him about the ship, about the crew, about the decisions that had been made in the months since the incident. He was lucid, and he was articulate, and he was wrong about what we should do. But he made his case carefully, and without drama, and I could see why 41 exhausted and frightened people had been listening to him. When I left, Myers walked me to the bridge. The bridge was running on skeleton watch. 2 crew on active stations, 1 monitoring life support and drive systems, 1 on comms. Both of them looked at me, when I came in, with the expression you'd give someone who'd walked in from a long way away. I looked at the main display, the corridor, our position, the checkpoint ahead. I looked at the comms station. How long since we last broadcast on the emergency frequency, I said. About 6 hours, sir, the crewman said. We broadcast for 6 hours per the protocol Officer Myers established. Change it to every 2 hours, I said. Increase the power draw on the broadcast if you can. I know the array is degraded. I want maximum output on whatever we've got. That'll pull from the reserves. I know what it'll pull from, I said. 2 hours, maximum output. He looked at Myers. She nodded. He turned to his board. I stood at the tactical station, my station. The board was familiar under my hands. Worn in the places where I'd worn it, calibrated the way I calibrated it, because nobody had changed it in a year, either out of respect or because nobody else had needed to use it. I ran a diagnostic. The systems were degraded, as Myers had told me, but the rail array was intact. I looked at the trajectory of our position relative to the checkpoint, relative to the patrol station, relative to Terran space beyond. 47 days. I thought about Ren's daughter, and the photograph that wasn't in his room. I thought about 9 names I would have to look at in the incident report when I was ready to look at them. I thought about 11 months I couldn't account for. I made my decision. It wasn't made on the bridge, standing at the tactical station. It was made in the medical bay, when Myers told me what had happened, when I heard the shape of the situation, and felt in my chest the thing I always felt when a mission was in danger of being abandoned, because the geometry looked bad. The decision was already made then. I was just working my way towards saying it out loud. We're going home, I said, loudly, not as an announcement, just said it to the displays and the corridor ahead, and the 47 days of transit, and the checkpoint, and whatever would come after the checkpoint. Myers heard it. She said nothing. In the morning, I said, I'm calling the crew together, everyone who can stand, and I'm going to tell them what we're doing. Ren won't agree, she said. No, I said. He may try to stop you. He can try, I said. But I'm the tactical officer and you're the signals officer, and together we outrank the navigator. And the drive is your department, anyway, which means the decision about where to point this ship is fundamentally a conversation between you and me. She was quiet. Is the drive ready? I said. I've been keeping it ready for 8 months, she said. I nodded. I stayed on the bridge for another hour, going through system reports, getting the feel of the ship's current state back into my hands and my head. Then I went back to the medical bay, lay down and slept without dreaming. In the morning, I called the crew together in the main corridor outside the mess. They stood in 2 loose groups, some in uniform, some in work clothes, some still in the plain gray garments the autodoc issued to patients. 41 people, thinner than they should have been. tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Ren stood near the back. He looked at me and said nothing. I told them where we were. Most of them knew, but I told them anyway, clearly, specifically, with numbers. The registry situation, the checkpoint, troll station, the 47 days. Then I told them what we were going to do. There were questions. They were good questions from people who had been living with uncertainty for a long time and who deserved honest answers. I gave them honest answers, including the ones where the honest answer was, I don't know, and here is what I think. A woman in engineering overalls asked about the fuel math, specifically whether 47 days at current thrust left enough reserve to handle any contingency en route. I told her it left a margin of about 11%, which was tighter than standard doctrine preferred, but within the range of an acceptable operational risk, and I told her what that margin could and couldn't cover. An older crewman from the life support rotation asked what happened if the Conclave vessel attempted a physical intercept. What exactly I meant when I said we would use defensive systems to maintain separation. I told him specifically. I told him the Conclave's doctrine and why I believed a physical confrontation was unlikely. And I told him that if it happened anyway, we would use kinetic denial to maintain a separation buffer, which was a way of saying we would use our defensive array to push any vessel trying to physically match our hull away from us, without destroying it or targeting its crew. He asked, can you actually do that? Selectively, yes, I said. It's what the kinetic defensive array was designed for. Anti-boarding and anti-proximity denial. It's defensive in the literal sense. It creates a zone around the hull that objects cannot occupy. It doesn't fire at targets. It repels. He nodded. I could see him working through it. He was a practical man. Once the mechanism was explained, the abstraction became manageable. A young woman I knew only slightly. She had been assigned to the Voss 3 weeks before the incident. A signals technician straight from training asked the question nobody else had asked. She asked it simply, without drama, in the voice of someone who had been thinking about it for a long time, and had decided that the time to ask was now. If we go all that way and nobody lets us in, she said. What if we get to Terran space and they look at our codes and they don't recognize us either? The corridor was quiet. They'll recognize us, I said. Codes are pre-accord, but they're in the original registry, not struck. We're listed as lost, not deregistered. Lost means our vessel identification is still in the system. Any Terran authority querying our codes will see a Thornwall-class cruiser assigned to the 14th Transit Group. Last known position in the corridor. They'll see the loss filing. They'll see us. But the Conclave said. The Conclave's registry and ours are not the same document, I said. The Accord created a joint transit registry for corridor operations. That registry followed Conclave protocols for updating codes. Our home registry is Terran Command's system. We are listed as lost in that system, not as non-existent. There's a difference. She thought about it. Then she nodded once, carefully, and I could see her filing it away. If I'm wrong, I said, then we deal with what's on the other side. But I'm not wrong. I told them the patrol response would probably be an attempt to intercept and hold for registry processing. I told them we would not be stopping. I told them that if the intercept was physical, if the Conclave patrol attempted to physically match our course and compel us to heave to, we would use our defensive systems to maintain separation, to fire on anyone, not to destroy anything. To maintain separation long enough to get close enough for a Terran Command response to our emergency signal. And if Terran Command doesn't respond, someone said, then we cross the border anyway, I said. And we deal with what's on the other side when we get there. We cross into Terran space as an identified Terran military vessel with the crew aboard, not as a holding case in a Conclave administrative facility. I looked at Ren. He was looking at the wall. We're the Voss, I said. We're listed as lost. Going to unlost ourselves. It was a poor way to say it, but they understood. I took a show of hands. It was not unanimous. 4 people, including Ren, did not raise their hands, and told them their dissent was recorded, and I meant that sincerely, and that their objection didn't change the decision, but it was real and it mattered, and if they were right, and I was wrong, I wanted that documented. Then I went to the bridge and told Myers to bring the drive to full transit thrust. The Voss moved. The first 3 days were quiet. We ran at full transit thrust, and the ship held together, and the drive performed the way Myers had spent 8 months, making sure it would perform. Tertiary coolant ran warm but didn't trip. The sensor secondaries gave us adequate coverage. On the bridge, I spent most of my time at the tactical station, and Myers spent most of her time at the comms station, cycling between the emergency broadcast and passive monitoring of the corridor ahead. Ren came to the bridge once on the second day. He stood near the entrance for about 20 minutes watching the display. I didn't say anything to him. Didn't say anything to me. He left. On the fourth day, Myers called me to the comm station. "There's something on the emergency band," she said. She put it through the speakers. It was distorted, a long way off, riding interference from the corridor's gravitational field. But it was structured. Not natural noise, a transmission. "Can you clean it up?" I said. "Working on it," she said. It took her 40 minutes. When she had it, she played it again. It was a ranging ping. Standard Terran emergency response protocol. Automated query on the emergency frequency, requesting identification from the transmitting vessel. I looked at her. She was already looking at me. "They heard us," she said. "They heard us," I said. 43 days out, she said. "Still too far for a response vessel to reach us before the checkpoint." "But they heard us," I said. "And now they know we're here." I sent a full identification burst on the emergency band. Ship name, registration codes. Both the old codes and a note that the old codes were pre-anchored, and that we were listed lost but actively crewed and under our own power, and transiting the corridor toward Terran space. Position, heading, speed, crew count, all of it. Everything the Conclave's registry didn't have. There was no reply for 19 hours. Then there was a reply. Brief and encrypted, in a command-level cipher. And Myers had to dig out the cipher keys from the ship's deep archives to decode it. When she decoded it, she read it twice. Then she read it to me. The message was from Terran Command. It said, "Maintain your heading, acknowledge." I sent the acknowledgement. We reached the checkpoint on day 11. The automated scan ran and flagged us as expected, and the flag went to the patrol station. And the patrol station dispatched a response vessel. We tracked it on the secondaries. Fast. A Conclave courier with an intercept package, the kind they used for customs violations and unauthorized transits. It matched our heading in about 30 hours and began closing the distance. Had a conversation with the crew about what was going to happen. Not a meeting this time, individually on the bridge in small groups. I told them what I expected, and I told them what I wanted from each station. And I told them that I did not expect this to become a fight. But if it became a situation where our ability to move was being physically constrained, I would use the defensive systems to maintain our freedom of movement. The Conclave vessel came into communication range on day 14. They were professional. They identified themselves clearly. They informed us that we were transiting the corridor without valid registry authorization, and that, under the terms of the transit accords, we were required to heave to for registry processing. They gave us the relevant administrative codes. They told us the process would take no longer than 30 days. I responded in plain language. I told them who we were. I told them what had happened. I told them that we had notified Terran Command of our position and heading, and that we were proceeding under those orders. Told them we were not a salvage case and not a navigation anomaly, and that I understood their administrative framework and respectfully considered it not applicable to our situation. There was a pause. Then they told me that under the transit accords, an unlisted vessel was required to halt regardless of the crew's assessment of its own status. The determination of status was the registry authority's determination, not the crew's. I told them I understood their position and that I was maintaining my heading. They did not immediately escalate. This surprised me. They matched our speed and held position about 400 kilometers off our port beam and transmitted on an ongoing basis. Variations on the same message, the requirements of the transit accords, the registry determination, the mandatory halt. Every variation was polite. Conclave doctrine didn't include threatening language. They were not trying to intimidate us. They were trying to process us. On the second day of their parallel transit, I went to find Ren. He was in his quarters again. He opened the door when I knocked without the long pause of the first time. He looked at me. He looked tired, but not the way he had looked before. The remoteness was still there, but something in it had shifted. "The Conclave vessel," he said. "Yes, they've been hailing for 2 days. Yes," he looked at the wall. He looked at his hands. He said, "I've been trying to work out if I'm wrong." I didn't say anything. "I know this ship," he said. "I know you're right that the drive can do this. Myers has done an extraordinary job keeping it functional." He paused. "I've been telling myself that the registry process would be orderly, that it would take time, but it would work." Another pause. "But when I think about the crew, 41 people in a Conclave administrative hold, I can't." He stopped. "Your daughter," I said. He looked at me. That same complicated look from the first time. Tired and sad and something that was almost an apology. "She doesn't know if I'm alive," he said. "No," I said. 30 days in the process becomes 60. 60 becomes 6 months. The administrative determination is appealed. The appeal has a timeline. The timeline extends. I know how their systems work." He was quiet. "I've been telling myself the process is better than the risk. I've been trying to believe that." "And," I said, "and I have been sitting in this room for 2 days listening to them hail us," he said. "And all I can think is that they want to put us back in the place where we don't exist." He looked at me. "I don't want to not exist anymore." "Then come to the bridge," I said. He came to the bridge. I don't want to overstate what his being there meant to the crew. They were doing their jobs whether he was there or not. Myers at the comms board, the engineering watch at the drive monitoring station, the rotating tactical crew keeping eyes on the Conclave vessel off our port beam. But when Wren walked onto the bridge and went to his navigator's station and sat down and brought up the corridor chart, something in the quality of the air changed. Something that had been absent for a long time came back. He ran a course plot. He did it the way he always did. Quickly, without apparent effort, the way you do a thing when you've done it thousands of times. He looked at the result and he said, 32 days to the border at current thrust, if the drive stays clean. Mears said 47 when we started, I said. We've already been underway 11 days, he said. And the drive is running cleaner than her original estimate. He paused. She was being conservative. She does that. Does if I agreed. The Conclave vessel held position off our port beam for 9 more days. They hailed us every 6 hours. I responded every 6 hours, calmly and specifically, with the same information. Who we were, what had happened, where we were going, and why. The responses were always from the same Conclave officer. I never got a visual. Conclave doctrine preferred audio only for border enforcement contacts. A practice I'd been briefed on years earlier, and had forgotten until the first hail came through. The voice was consistent. A careful, measured voice, not unfriendly, thoroughly, completely professional, called us an unlisted vessel. Every time, in every variation of the message, that was the classification, unlisted vessel. Not derelict and not salvage case and not human warship, just unlisted vessel proceeding without valid registry authorization. I understood the precision. They couldn't call us a warship. Because a warship required registry recognition, they were declining to extend. They couldn't call us a derelict, because a derelict didn't respond to hails, and we were responding to everyone. Unlisted vessel was the only category their framework offered. On the 3rd day, I asked Myers whether she thought anyone on that Conclave vessel had actually looked up our original codes and read what came back. She said, "Definitely." The moment we crossed the checkpoint and the flag went to the patrol station, the duty officer queried the codes. Standard procedure. "So they know," I said. "They know we're the Voss. They know our codes match a vessel listed as lost in the Accord's joint registry," she said. Whether they consider that the same as knowing where the Voss is a question of how their administrative framework handles the distinction. And if they're the kind of people who can hold both ideas at once. I said. They know they're hailing a crude warship that their registry says doesn't exist. And they're still calling us an unlisted vessel. "Yes," she said. "That's not hostile," I said. "That's something worse." She looked at me. "What do you mean?" "Hostility, I understand," I said. "Hostility is a position you can push back against. What they're doing is purely procedural. They're not arguing with us about whether we exist. They're just processing, running the procedure." The procedure says unlisted vessel, so unlisted vessel it is. I paused. They could send a message to someone in the Joint Registry Authority right now. Include a transcript of this exchange and say, there is something wrong with the registry. This vessel's crew is responding coherently to our hails. These people are alive. And that message would generate a query, and the query would go to a review board, and the review board would have a timeline, and the timeline would take a very long time, Myers said. Take a very long time, I said. I thought about Vada's filter maintenance. 2 failures, fixed quietly, logged without announcement, the engineering principle. If you catch it before it becomes critical, nobody has to panic. If you let the process run until it becomes an emergency, everyone pays for it. The Conclave's process was the opposite of that principle, applied to human beings. On the 7th day, the young signals technician, her name was Arlen, brought me a handwritten note. It was from 3 of the crew still in medical holds, the ones who were conscious but not yet mobile. She had gone to each of them and asked if they wanted to send anything to the bridge. 2 of them had asked for situation updates, which she had delivered. The 3rd one had written a note. The note said, "Tell the tactical officer we know where we're going." I kept it. I keep it now. On the 9th day, the Conclave vessel's hails stopped. They didn't leave, they just stopped hailing. I asked Myers what she thought that meant. They've escalated to a higher authority, she said. Someone with more decision-making capacity is evaluating the situation. They're waiting for instruction. And the higher authority will decide what, I said. I don't know, she said. It's possible they'll attempt an intercept, a physical match and contact, to stop us from moving. And if they do that, I said, then you do what you said you'd do, she said, and we'll see. I ran through the defensive geometry every day, the rail array angles, the kinetic response windows, the separation distances that would keep us free without escalating into something that couldn't be walked back. I ran through it so many times I could have done it in my sleep. Ren watched me sometimes without saying anything. On the 12th day after the hails stopped, a second Conclave vessel appeared on our sensors, larger than the first. A medium-weight patrol hull, the kind they used for actual border enforcement rather than administrative intercepts. I called the crew to stations. The second vessel came up on our starboard side, matching speed at roughly the same separation distance as the first. 2 Conclave ships were now flanking us, 1 port, 1 starboard, running parallel, not closing. Then Myers said, "I've got a Terran signal." I crossed to the comm station in about 4 steps. The signal was clean, much cleaner than the ranging ping from 40 days earlier. It was a directed tight beam, aimed specifically at our position, which meant someone knew exactly where we were. Myers decoded it. She read it once and looked at me, and then read it again. "Terran command," she said. "They're telling us they have us on their tracking systems. Telling us there is a Terran response vessel en route to our position." She looked up. Estimated contact in 31 hours. I looked at the display. The 2 Conclave ships flanking us, 31 hours. We were still 16 days from the border. "They're going to meet us here," I said. "Before the border." "Yes," she said. "Which means they're coming into the corridor." "Yes. Which means they've decided we're worth coming into the corridor for." She said nothing to that. She didn't need to. I sent an acknowledgement. Then I walked back to the tactical station, and I stood there for a long time looking at the display, with the 2 Conclave ships flanking us, and the clean signal from Terran Command and the 31-hour clock. Ren was at his station. He was looking at the same display. "They came for us," he said. Not in a surprised way. In a quiet way, like he was saying something he needed to hear himself say. "They came for us," I said. The Conclave vessels held position throughout the 31 hours. They made no attempt to intercept or compel. Whether this was because the Terran response complicated their authority calculation, or because the authority consultation had gone in a direction that changed their instructions, I don't know. They held position, and they didn't hail, and they didn't close. The Terran vessel came in at speed, frigate, not a heavy hull, but armed and clean and running under its own authority into the corridor, which was a political statement as much as a navigation decision. It came alongside on a broad approach, shed speed professionally, and matched our heading at 300 kilometers. Then it opened a voice channel, clear and unencrypted, and I heard a voice I didn't know say, "Utes Voss, this is the frigate Caldecott. We have you in visual. You look good." I stood at the comm station for a moment. Myers had stepped aside. She was looking at me. I keyed the transmitter. "Caldecott, this is the Voss. We read you. I stopped. I started again. "We are Utes Voss, Thornwall-class heavy cruiser, 14 months in the corridor, 41 crew, currently proceeding under our own power. Request escort to the border." There was a brief pause. Then the Caldecott's voice came back. "That request is granted. We're with you." The last 16 days were not dramatic. That's the honest account. The Conclave vessels continued to parallel our course, but took no action. The Caldecott stayed at 300 kilometers on our starboard side and ran with us. Myers maintained the emergency broadcast because she said it was important that anyone listening knew the Voss's signal and could identify it. Spent most of those 16 days in two places: the bridge and the medical bay, where the crew still in holds were finishing their recovery protocols. 3 of them came out of hold during those 16 days. One of them, a young engineer named Ferris, no relation to the admiral, came out, was told where we were and what was happening, and spent the next several hours walking the ship, touching the bulkheads. Not dramatically, just touching them, like he was making sure they were real. I found him in the port corridor near engineering on the 15th day. He was sitting on the deck with his back against the bulkhead, hands loose in his lap. "You all right?" I said. "I keep thinking I'm still in the hold." He said, "That I'm dreaming this." "You're not," I said. "How do you know?" he said. I sat down on the deck beside him. The ship vibrated through the plating, that low pulse the crew's thrust. "Because the ship is moving," I said. "You can feel it." He was quiet. Then he put his hand flat on the deck and held it there, and I watched his face change as he felt it. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah," I said. We crossed the border on day 30 as Wren had plotted. The marker was a navigational buoy, a simple transponder on a stable orbit at the edge of Terran administrative space. When we crossed its position, Wren said border from his station, and nothing more. Myers was at the comms board. She updated the emergency broadcast to include our new position, inside Terran space, and then she looked at me. "We're home," she said. "We're not home yet," I said. "We're in Terran space." "It's home enough," she said. The Conclave vessels did not cross the border. They held at the line, and then began to fall back, and within 6 hours, they were gone from our sensors. Formal reception was at the naval station, 18 days of internal transit beyond the border. I won't spend much time on that. There were procedures, and there were debriefs, and there was a medical evaluation that took 3 days, and found that everyone aboard was, in the language of the report, within expected parameters for the duration and nature of the experience. There were communications arranged, families notified, calls connected. The particular kind of quiet that falls over a space when someone has just told a family member they're alive. Wren was given a private room for his call. I don't know what was said. That's his. The formal inquiry took 6 months. I've mentioned it already. I sat across from Admiral Ferris in her untouched tea and told her everything I've told here in more detail, with dates and logs and the record Myers had maintained throughout. The inquiry concluded that the decisions made after my recovery were within the authority of the acting command structure and consistent with the welfare of the crew and the standing orders of the vessel, which was still a commissioned warship, regardless of what the Accord Registry had decided. They updated the registry. I know that sounds like a small thing. In one sense it is. A clerical correction, a record amended, a status code changed from lost, presumed non-operational to active. But I think about the Conclave officer who received the amended filing, somewhere in a station I'll never see, and I think about what that officer's administrative system now shows when it queries the Utes Voss. A warship, active, full class, last transit date of the corridor, crew 41, commanding officer listed, status current, not a navigation anomaly, not a salvage case, not an unlisted vessel transmitting invalid codes. A ship. Been asked, in the years since, by reporters and by junior officers in lecture halls, and by the occasional civilian at a gathering where the conversation somehow ends up here, what it felt like. That question is always asked as if the answer will be large. as if there's a dramatic piece of it that makes for a good story. The honest answer is that what it felt like was smaller than you'd expect and more permanent than I can describe. When we crossed the border, and Border and Myers said, home enough, and the drive ran under my feet. What I felt was something like the moment when a sound you've been hearing so long, you stop noticing it finally stops. The absence of the thing you carried. Myers transferred out 18 months after our return. She went to a research posting. Signals work. Something to do with long-range emergency frequencies and their propagation in gravitational corridors, improving the reach of vessels in situations like ours. I read her papers sometimes. They're very good. She still writes in that clean technical shorthand, still builds the argument the same way, lay the facts, demonstrate the conclusion, append nothing sentimental. Wren stayed in service for 4 more years and then retired. His daughter was 19 when we were declared, lost, and 31 when we came back. He told me once, over a late meal at the base, that she had kept the old press release, the one the Terran Navy had issued when the Voss was struck from the register. He found it in her apartment in a folder, with other things she'd kept. He didn't say it in a way that asked for a response. He said it the way you say something, when you just need it to have been said out loud, to another person. I kept the ship. That's not accurate. I don't own the Voss. Nobody owns a warship. But I continued in service aboard her for another 11 years, which is what I mean. The hull was refitted at the naval station. After our return, the port bow sections rebuilt new sensor arrays, new communications package with updated registry protocols so the Accord code situation couldn't happen again. She came out of refit looking like herself, smelling like herself. That low cruise thrust pulse in the frame that I could recognize at 3 in the morning, half awake and know where I was. She's in service still, as far as I know. Different crew, different tactical officer. I'm told they kept the registry notation in the ship's log, the original loss filing and the date of the correction, and a summary of the transit. Standard practice for vessels with unusual service records. Every new crew reads it at the start of their posting. I hope it reads as it actually was, not as it gets simplified down to. It wasn't a rescue. Nobody came and got us. The Caldecott met us and ran with us, and that mattered enormously. But the Voss was already moving before the Caldecott appeared on our sensors. We had been moving for 11 days. We had decided to move. I think about that sometimes when the question comes up in a lecture hall and a young officer asks what the lesson is, what the principle is, what the thing is that someone is supposed to take away from 40 years of service. I tell them the same thing every time. The register can be wrong. Institutions that believe in their own records have a specific kind of blindness. They see the record, and they cannot fully see what is in front of them. We existed before the registry acknowledged it. We were a warship with 41 people aboard, doing the work of keeping a ship alive through a long transit. The Conclave's administrative framework had no category for us, and that is the Conclave's limitation, not ours. There is no lesson more fundamental than that one. You are not the record of you. The ship is not the entry in the register. You move and you keep moving. And eventually the record catches up.